everyone. Welcome to Tangle 12. Today we're going to finish up the cucumber test class that we started in the last episode. I am still working on this ticket, implementing these cucumber scenarios. So far, we implemented the background sample test data. And now we're going to move on from this, which is done, to this, which we haven't done yet. So if I look at the scenario, you can see that this client adds entry is using another data table just like before. So I'm going to put a parameter here and then use this same thing and capture it in a list of 10 entries. Import. We want to periodically make sure that things are happening as they need to. So I would do this, assert false import. Yeah, you want to use JUnit Jupyter. And it's going to be data list add is empty. So basically what this is saying is make sure that the data list is not empty, because otherwise this test would not work because you're adding something. I'm only interested in the first one in the list. In this case, there is only one in the list, but just to make sure that we're dealing with one, I'm going to grab and then to get the first one, you do get 0. Yes, I know it's counterintuitive to put 0 here, but that's a programming thing. And here I'm just going to keep with the pattern here and say entry add. Actually, let's be a little bit more verbose here. I'm going to say to add and then entry to add. All right, so likewise, let's make sure that this is not null. Jupyter. Now I've got my Pojo for the test, and I need to actually do the thing that the test is about. And that means I want to do an API call. So this is our first API call in the tradition of what's called top-down design. I don't want to think about it, so I'm just going to make a method. And I'm going to call it doPost entry to add. Now the doPost call is going to have the assertions to make sure that it actually works. So I don't have to do anything more than this in this class. Since I suspect that this is going to be common to a lot of different test classes, I'm going to create a utility class and we'll call it TanRestClient. Okay, so I haven't made this yet. I'm going to put it in my utility class in under test because this is definitely going to be a test class. Oop. And the first method will be they'll all be static methods, and this means that you don't need to instantiate this thing. So call it public static void doPost and this should be enough. All right, so this method is done. It's not going to work, but it's done. So to implement this, I have to introduce another Spring component, which is called Web Test Client. Come to think of it, since we're going to be working with Web Test Client, let's change the tester class's name to be clear. Shift F6, and I'm going to call it REST Tester. And it magically renames all of the references. Thanks, IntelliJ. While I'm here, I'm losing interest in tan as a prefix for all my classes. It's too semantically like the word tan, and that's not really the point. It's easy to say, but it just doesn't work. So I'm just going to change everything to BF for big fractal. So again, Shift F6, and then I can just do BF. I'm going to change my shortcut in the shell as well. So instead of Tangle, I'm going to make it BF. This is just a convention that I've used for years where this prefix is the same as the thing I need to get to the work directory. And then boom, here I am. So next we have to add web test client to a project. All right, it is not the rest assured one. I'm going to jump into Baldung and just scroll down until I get a Maven thing. And we'll put the scope of test. All right, let's go into my REST tester. And first I'm going to wire up web test client, which is going to be auto wired and web test client. And this is going to be another Spring Boot test, but it still wants a little bit of extra configuration here. You can see here, we have to add a parameter here, which is web environment, and Spring Boot test web environment and random port. Every time you run this, you should use a random port. Now I can use web test client in this method. So I'll put web test client. Now, web test client is it's called a fluent API. So what that means is essentially you put method after method separated by periods. So I'm going to start off with the first one, which is post. And then here, actually, you could do this. And then you just chain them down here. So then you go URI, and this is where the actual REST call is going to be made. So I'm going to put a parameter up here and just call it URL. Next one is body value. And this is what you're putting in the body of the REST call. So I'll put the object in there. And then we want to add some headers. You need to say what kind of content it's going to be. And it's a JSON file. And then put in an accept header. And the exchange call is what reaches out to the server. When it comes back, double check that it has a status code of is created. And then you grab the response from the response body and put it into an object. All right, so one problem is this is not static anymore. So I'm going to auto wire, and that way it'll get wired up so I don't have to use static. And it's BF REST tester, and I'm just going to call it REST tester. Let's just try to make this into a component. I'll just call it a service. And see if that worked. It did. And down here, I need to put this. And we need to put in the URL. Let's put a breakpoint here to see if it gets this far. I still have scenario post up here. I'm going to click the debug run, and it goes through the scenarios, and we got an error. Usually what I do is I just scroll right down to this one. Okay, so I've seen this before. I'm not going to explain it because I'm not sure I understand it myself. A lot of development is just trying things until they work. So I have a component that's calling another component, and it's complaining that the wiring isn't right. So I'm not going to think. I'm just going to put this into here. So I'm moving the main thing in here. And I still want the logic in a separate class. So I'm going to just put this as a parameter for now. This is just a temporary stopgap. And I need to have this stuff still. And then we're going to add in web test client. All right, I don't like this, but let's just see if it works. We got further that time. All right, now we have, oh, okay. So you know what? I didn't, when I made this change to the classes, see, I changed that to BF entry. So we have to change the database. See, this is still tan entry, so I got to do that. And just so you can see how this works, go into the database. Here are the tables. I'm just going to delete them. And then we run the server again. And that'll recreate the schema. So let's just double check. And you can see now we've got a BF. Cool. Close that, rerun the test, see what happens. All right, we made it to the exchange breakpoint. And you can see the object was sent in. So the real question is, what's going to happen when we keep going? F8. Oh, it went through. And remember, we didn't actually write this call yet, so it has to fail. So if we go there. So it throws an exception because it didn't get the response that it wanted, which is created. So that means we have successfully failed. Yay, you failed. And you can see right here, status expected created, but was 404 not found. This is exactly what we want. So with such exciting failure, let's go and try to do more. So in this REST tester, I need to have more than post. I'm going to just make a bunch of methods here. So I basically just copied the same method over and over again, but used the different HTTP actions. So for get, I don't send a body. So to review what we did here, all of these calls are identical except for the first method. So you can see it's get, post, put, delete. And then most of it's the same, except in some cases you don't return anything. So this ends with expect status okay after delete. And sometimes you don't put in things like the gets. You're not supplying an object like I am here. So there's really not much difference between these. In fact, you could probably write a much tighter class, but refactoring is for another time. All right. So as quickly as possible, I want to create as much failure as possible here and just fill in all of these things. Boom, boom, boom. So first is get the entry list. So I know it's a list of BF entry, and we're going to just call it entry list equals rest tester do get list. And then we put that web test client in there, even though I don't want to. And it's going to have a different URL. We'll say entry list. And that should be it. I could just make it an object. Let's take a look here. Let's get rid of this. It doesn't like it, but it's better than this. See, it's complaining that we're not specifying the types, but especially for those of you coming from a JavaScript background, you're probably like, what's the deal? Why is this such a big deal? All right, so now this gets the entry list. And so what I'm going to do here is just assert not empty. Here, I can do this. So I'm going to take this and make it a member field in the class itself. And then, so this is going to save it for the next thing, which will be in the same breath. So now, rather than getting it again, I can do assert size is equal to length. So that one's done. Always be defensive, especially with test classes. So don't assume that this is going to be set correctly. So I'm going to do assert not null entry list. And that should be enough. Size can be 0 because it'll fail here. All right, so the next one is take away the pending exception, which is just there to make it obvious that it hasn't been written yet. So this is the same as the list, except here I'm going to do entry and say entry, and it's do get, and it's not entry list, and assert, say not null. And this would be done, except we got to deal with key. So for key, I'm going to do this for now. I'm going to say key and then add the key here. So this will become clearer when I do the actual implementation. Why isn't this working? Oh, because it still has an object. It shouldn't be. I'm definitely going to have to deal with all of this typecasting. All right, so the last thing here, and for the episode, I'll just do the gets, is making sure that the entry matches a previous entry. So if you look at the bean, it has another table here. And so we have to do the data table. Actually, this, for some reason, is not here. And instead of add, I'm going to say match. And then this one. So we have to assert equals entry to match an entry, which might someday work, but not today. Thanks for listening.